Okay. I had Unit 5. So, the Enlightenment, what was it? Well, it was an intellectual movement and was focused on ideas concerning God, reason, nature, and humanity. What allowed it to happen? Well, skepticism. People finally started thinking for themselves. They didn't take anything, whatever they heard, and believed it. The Renaissance in the years before had also played a big part as they moved away from religion with the Reformation and whatnot. Whatever. But the learning process was completely flipped upside down. For the first time, colleges were being built and whatnot. And the printing press, of course, finally people could actually afford an education, which had never before been seen. Revolutions, well, they were mostly spurred on by Enlightenment thinkers, people wanting freedom and whatnot. Made up many independent revolutions, the significant ones being the North American, French, Haitian, and Spanish American, which I will be talking about. So, the North American and French. The North American Revolution, Americans, well, I mean, they thought they were British citizens, but Britain was treating them like a colony and they were acting like an imperial power. They were raising taxes and whatnot, and this really pissed off the colonials, colonies. And, well, they fought for liberty and whatnot, and that's how that started. The French Revolution. The United States had went to France and asked for their help, and they gave us soldiers and whatnot. And then when those soldiers came back after the United States, well, they brought those values back, and they kind of liked them. It was nice. And at the same time, the government was nearly broke. The elites had been spending lavishly for God knows how long, and they didn't really give anything to the rest of the citizens, and they were broke. They were very, very poor. And the common citizens, they didn't feel like they had any representation. They made up the third estate. Of the three, the two were only controlled by 2% of the population, whereas 98% was shoved into the third estate. So, yeah, that's a bit of a problem. And this was a very, very violent revolution. There were tons of executions. The guillotine was a family event that you would go and have a picnic and watch. The Haitian Latin America, well, the Haitian Revolution had some extreme inequality. They had 500,000 slaves and 40,000 white people. These white people were split into kind of two categories. There were the rich landowners, and then there were the petits blancs, the poor whites, and they had tons of plantations and whatnot. And when the slaves gained the upper hand, they kind of had to destroy all the plantations. And so at the end of the revolution, they didn't have anything, and their economy was completely tanked. And so they kind of went back to an agricultural society after this. In Spanish America, the revolution was more out of necessity. The Portuguese and Spanish governments had kind of collapsed with Napoleon and whatnot in Europe, and there were some other reasons, of course, but that was kind of a problem. And it took a lot longer than many of the other revolutions because there was tons of internal struggle, and a revolution would kick off somewhere, but somebody might decide it was too radical, and in that same place would put a stop to it. And so they were fighting amongst themselves. And they couldn't unite together after the revolutions because they just couldn't communicate. There were too many geographic barriers. I mean, obviously, the Amazon rainforest, for example, even today we have trouble navigating it, much less a couple hundred years ago. The Industrial Revolution. So why England? Well, they were politically stable, and that with a modern banking system, you can't get investment into business if you're unstable. Nobody wants to invest into that. And with the modern banking system, banks could give out loans, and businesses are expensive to start, and these loans were needed. And along with not having to work in agriculture, they had a surplus of workers. So, resources. England was sitting on top of tons of coal. They had so much. And they had tons of natural waterways, which were the first major way of travel for plants and stuff. And at the same time, the rest of Europe was kind of having a little bit of a problem with little old Napoleon. And so they weren't really in a place to be starting any type of industrial revolution at the time. So, what technology was there? Well, the technology that was made, it was more innovations on things. It wasn't so much inventions. They were making things better, faster, and more efficient. There were inventions, of course, but that wasn't really the goal of it. An important invention, though, was the train, which was massive. It was faster than a horse and could go back upstream, unlike a canal. And these created huge industry. I mean, finally, it didn't take weeks or whatever to get one thing to another city. It could be done in a single day. And this really sped up the rate of innovation as finally everything was just faster. So reactions to this, well, there was a new middle class and they weren't rich, but they weren't poor anymore, and this created a new market for places. Women also began to work at this time. They were nurses and teachers and whatnot. They didn't really have the high paying jobs, but they were able bodies and they started doing their share, so that'll help any economy. Children began to go to school instead of working. This was really because with new industry, they needed a better, well educated workforce. And I mean, children were kind of the future of the society, so best to teach them. Um, but cities really became overcrowded and had lots of disease. Cheap houses were built en masse just to house the people, and sanitation was terrible. There was dirty water and frequent outbreaks of different diseases and whatnot. It was kind of gross. There were rats and bleh. 1 in 42 people died. 39 and a half years was the average life expectancy, which was actually down from the centuries before, which is a little bit counterintuitive. And the government's role in all this, well, it's kind of decided that the government is there to help its citizens. Utilitarianism, an action is right as long as it promotes happiness, and the government should make whatever decision helps the most people, makes the most people happy is the right choice. And this was kind of went about in a couple different ways. There were many, but the two big ones being socialism and capitalism. Socialism was the means of production and industry would be seized by the government or the state or whatever and controlled there, whereas capitalism was privately owned. And that's kind of why a lot of people say they can't coexist, because they're complete opposites. Thank you for watching, and I hope I did all right.